because there were so many people, it was like it just went in an instant.
We didn't know
I
that.
think there was a year in between there sometime. All right, so the deal today is, I was going to share with you kind of that other side. I think most of you are aware, and I was surprised to find out over the last couple of years that a lot of you, or several people in the class, weren't aware that like all the art on my slides is all mine. You know, there are obviously some things that I cut and paste, you know, but not too much. So that has generated some interest, and it's certainly generated some controversy over the years by design. So that's okay. So just be aware that this is rated Z. So if you're going to be offended, feel free to not listen. I shouldn't say anything too offensive. All right, so bridging the gap, that's kind of the theme for this thing I share with you once a year, which is probably the single most fun thing I do at this school right now. So I'm going to kind of talk about the evolution, basically, of me as a, whatever I am now, faculty, scientist, type, artist, and all the other things I've done without getting too bored on all my history, but we'll try and bring it all together, and I'll give you throughout a strong sampling of various types of artwork that I've done, at least things that I still have, obviously. So, enough about you guys, let's talk about me for a change. So when did this art thing start? Again, my mom thinks that she had sensations of me drawing arrows during gestation against her uterus, but I don't remember that personally. We actually have a pretty strong family history of art, both musical and visual. Friedrich Zachow knows the spelling, that was the original spelling of my last name. I actually gave piano lessons to Hamburg in Germany way back in the day. And that was definitely passed down. I had a very strong musical background on that side of my family. I was always artistic, and being left-handed back in the late 50s and early 60s, that was still not the thing. Parents wanted their kids all to be right-handed, so they would try and make me do everything with my right hand, and I wouldn't do it because I would just put things in my left hand. So I wised up, and I said, okay, I'll just do things with both hands. So I used to draw backwards and write backwards with both hands, and they thought I was definitely crazy, and I kind of worked my way through that. I had a real nice upbringing in that my maternal grandmother was a very talented painter and pianist, and I used to go to her house on the weekends and paint. I mean, how great was that? It was like, you know, a hallmark existence. And then when I was in 5th grade, I actually got a scholarship from the Milwaukee Art Museum. It was like the summer program they have, and that was pretty cool. In 11th grade, my crowning achievement in high school, you know, we had to take Spanish, a foreign language, so I picked Spanish like most people did back then. I couldn't stand it. I had nothing against the Spanish language, but I was like a teenager and I didn't want to speak Spanish. So I convinced my Spanish teacher by drawing in my Spanish textbook caricatures of him that he should transfer me to the commercial art class. And they did. They got me out of Spanish and put me in that. So that was one of my proudest moments. And then the backdrop for all of that was taking architecture every year too. I was like George Costanza. I wanted to be an architect, you know, and ended up doing this. Bridging gaps, so the more recent for me, in the 70s and 80s, I was actually in the Air Force for a lot of years. I was in TAC Command, and I was actually an air traffic controller, if you can believe that, for like 7 years. That explains a lot too. But I also developed into what was called the unit cartographer. And long story short, we used to deploy, you know, go live in tents, and we would take our radar equipment and go live out in the bush for months on end. And in this kind of inflatable thing where we had our radar screens, we had big plexiglass panels about the size of these where we would draw maps of where we were so we could manually control the aircraft and plot them out. So I used to do that. That was a lot of fun. And of course, then they worked out around that I had some artistic background, and I would do a lot of cartoons. We had kind of like this silly little paper for a unit that we could distribute once a week. Those were golden days because we had, like, you know, the only enemy on earth was the Soviet Union, and we were never at war with them, so, you know, there was always this looming Soviet menace, and a lot of good cartoons came out of that. When I eventually got out of the Air Force, I did get a commercial art degree, and then I found out that the last thing on earth I wanted to be was a commercial artist, because, like, when you do something for fun, like art or music, I would imagine, and then all of a sudden you're getting paid to do that, to, like, feed yourself and pay your rent, it's no fun anymore. Especially with my definition of a client, which is inherently a grumpy person who can't make a decision. These people will come in, they tell you exactly what they wanted, you write it down, you do it, and then they say, well, that's not what I said I wanted. So I thought, well, no, that's no fun. So I got out of that, went back into college, got a few more degrees, and this was actually the onset of what you're familiar with, the Aero era, all right? And I would argue that I had some of the greatest illustrating class notes ever, and I used to, like, draw everything a lot better than that stuff on the board. That's I started working in a lab. I was an older student, obviously, and it so happened that the guy that was teaching anatomy and physiology was only about a year older than me. So we kind of chummed up, and he brought me in as a work study student, and I used to do all these lab cartoons. I mean, he still has some of this stuff hanging up. It was amazing. I was up there for years. Super Xenopus, which was America's first amphibian superhero. It's like Superman standing there with a cape on. And then lots of other stuff with all the hamsters and guinea pigs we worked with, and lots of fun. And then we have rats, and more rats. Lots of cartoons with rats. Right? It's amazing. Like they're apparently really funny animals. You know, like you put sunglasses on. All right. How do we create things? Here's our biosynthetic pathway for the day. So how does this all work? All right. So first of all, like I was in Paris a few years ago. It was raining. You know, like does that not put you in the mood for a lot of things? Well, for me, it's like painting. You know, I was drinking wine. And you know, you see it, you taste it, you smell it, you kind of get this aha moment. This is actually me in Nobel's lab somewhere in the south of France a few years ago. And from there, we of course take an ADPH and reduce it, and we get a palette full of paint. I figured you'd like that just because it's been too long since you've had any biochemistry. And eventually, you know, like they say, once you get started, you get over that, you know, that blank white page syndrome. It all starts to come together, and usually once I get started painting, that's it for me for the day. I don't make plans to do much of anything else in the evening, you know, which is great. It's a way for me to escape reality. Okay, the Z timeline, let's continue. So the dawn of my career in endocrinology, period. So we're going to go through these circuits now. This is like a Picasso lecture, right? So beginning in around 1988, we had this guy come to the University of Wisconsin. He was named Gil Greenwald. He was like the modern father of reproductive endocrinology. And so they wanted me to work up a flyer for this guy coming there. So I figured, well, what would be more appropriate than the Sistine Chapel, except, you know, forming an ovarian follicle for the book of gonatogenesis, not Genesis. That went over real big, and we actually wanted to paint that on the lab ceiling, but they wouldn't let me do that. I was actually seriously going to do that, but the facility said there's no way in hell you're going to paint this on the ceiling. So, this was actually done just as kind of an interesting educational historical perspective. After I'd done this sketch, this was the first version of Photoshop, and every line that you tried to draw took like 10 seconds. You'd like go across with a stylus, and then the line would follow behind it. And so you can imagine how long it took to do the shading. That was almost like doing the Sistine Chapel, except on a computer. Since you asked, the 1980s, then we move in. This is the commercial art versus fine art. Is there really a difference, period? And back then, I don't know if it is anymore, I've kind of fallen out of this, but like wildlife art was really popular in the 1980s. Like people were just gonzo for this stuff. So I went through my lions, tigers, bears, wolves, birds, and family pets period. So here we have my series of bears, which coincidentally start with a bear on a sleeping bear on a sunny rock, then we have a bear on a snowy rock, and then we have a fishing bear on a wet rock, right? And that was, it was like I had no idea that this was going to happen. This was over a period of like a couple of years. I ended up with all these bear rock pictures. And I still have all of those. These are some of the oldest paintings that I didn't end up giving away or selling. Then we get into the pumpkin autumn watercolor rescued from the trash by my mom and a semi-nude lady at the piano period. So yeah, I started to dabble around a lot with like watercolor and just started to try and like change the mindset from, you know, when I was coming up, everyone wanted to be Norman Rockwell if you were an illustrator. I don't know if any of you know of Norman Rockwell, but he would paint these photoreal pictures for the Saturday Evening Post. You know, and it was like, well, maybe we want to try and get away from that a little bit, try to loosen it up. And this actually ended up being the last oil painting that I ever did. After that, I transitioned strictly to acrylic and watercolor. And I still have both of those. My dad had them, he passed away a few years ago. And then I told my sister, I really don't want anything for this house, except I want this painting back, because everyone wanted it, and I got it back. So I insisted. When Big Brother insists, he gets what he wants. Then this is a family member wants another painting of an old farmhouse for the living room. This is another thing in the 1980s, where, especially in the Midwest, where I was living at the time, that's where my family's from. It was like, you know, people were really into this like old farmhouse country living stuff. I'll use the word stuff. And so I ended up doing a lot of this type of painting. This one was also hanging in my dad's house. Yeah, I guess I got that hanging somewhere too. I don't remember. My house is like an art gallery, except the thing is, it's all my art. You know, it's like no one else's. Oh, this is good. This is the 1990s. The California living and dreaming period. I had no money, but lots of hair back then. So these were two of the paintings. This one's actually Santa Barbara. This is a Santa Monica Pier. And then it's really hard to see. This is the best image it makes it look as old as it is. Like, but this guy right here with all this hair and this big handlebar mustache, guess who that is? I'm like that much taller than everyone else in this picture too, because I guess people were shorter back then, except for me. But yeah, that was out of Cedar Sinai. That was the OBG reproductive endocrine group. Yeah, brings back a lot of memories. 1990s and early 2000s, lots of long days and nights and weekends in the lab, and if I need an illustration of something medical, it's easier to draw it myself, periods. And this is where I really started to basically transcend from pencil and paper to the computer. I've since gone back to like the more classic art forms, pencil and paper and painting, but you know, the whole Photoshop PowerPoint thing was brand new, and everyone was all over it. You know, it was really exciting to play around with that. And so this was the first color illustration I ever did. I didn't use this one with you guys because in their infinite wisdom they took me out of the GI course last year. I guess they figured you had had enough of me. But this was a fat rat, a fat mouse, and this was the real science behind the generation of the obese mouse phenotype. So if you'd had me in lecture, this would be hilarious because you'd understand what the hell I'm talking about. But anyways, again, Photoshop version 1.0, and that thing probably took me a couple of weeks to draw that because of how slow and clunky that was. But it was amazing. Like you could do airbrush on the computer. You could erase things and just do them over again. Really cool stuff. So we get into the modern era, the transitions period between here, the shore, Mexico, Europe. A lot of travel. I've been fortunate now to the point in my career where I'm able to do that. You'll get there someday. Be patient for about 30 or 40 years and you'll get there. And aging, you know, the natural processes that we all go through. So you can see kind of the theme here for those of you who have painted with me on paint night. We've done a couple of, actually I think all three of them have been water scenes. There's the reason for that, which I can get into later. But these are some of the paintings that I have hanging down. We have a house down at Brick, kind of a weekend house, and you know you can guess what the theme of the house is. But everyone calls it the beach house, but we're nowhere near the beach. But I guess because it's in brick, it's like, oh, you're at a beach house. Sure, it is on the lagoon, so I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. So yeah, these were from ideas from Cabo. What's the island? Blanking out right across from Cancun. Cozumel, thank you. Everyone says, well, do you have a boat? I said, yeah, so I painted one. That's my boat I have painted in the bedroom. Yeah, and just some more from probably Cabo. A lot of times people ask, well, like, do you paint for pictures? And then, well, no, what I'll do is I'll take pictures, you know, obviously, and then I'll look at the picture when I get home, and then I put it away, and I just kind of reassemble it in my head. So, like, the colors are a little bit different. You know, I kind of make it the way I want to make it. Maybe, you know, like, there weren't so many palm trees in this picture, so I put a few more edges to palm trees and stuff like that. And we have the Tuscany sunflowers and grape period, so you have to pay attention to this, because here's an interesting evolution. So here we have Tuscan sunflowers in a vineyard, lots of sunflowers, lots of grapes. More Tuscan sunflowers, and yet another vineyard. Yet more sunflowers, and that's basically the vineyard. These are in Kansas, because I just got sick of painting grapes and grape leaves. So my wife said, well, I want more sunflowers. I said, fine, but you're not getting the grapes this time. You got the grapes, just send the grapes. The Jersey Shore period, all right? Interesting, you know, again, this is an idea of kind of a conglomeration of, you know, what it could look like. This is like Sandy Hook, except that's not what Sandy Hook looks like, but that's what I would like it to look like if it was a little prettier, right? Point Pleasant Beach, Brick Beach #1, where I used to always take my son when he was little. And in this, again, it's kind of bleached out, but this is actually what our backyard used to look like, the lagoons and the houses across the lagoon. Until Hurricane Sandy came by, and this all disappeared, both of these houses disappeared, half of my house disappeared, so now it looks a lot different. Actually, it looks pretty nice now. It took about 6 years for it to get back on its feet, but yeah, it was a pretty wild, crazy event. I aged about 30 years, I think, during that month following that. Oh yeah, and here's the picture of dear old Dad when he was in Korea, and my father-in-law when he was in Europe in World War II. They passed away actually not far from each other, time-wise not far between. And that was a few years back, so I thought, well, what a great way to honor them. I'll just do paintings of them. So, excuse me, in my office at home, I have their flags from their funerals with their medals, and then they each have their paintings. I thought, that'll be something people will want, you know, rather than fighting over some stupid flag. That's something that can be passed down through the generations. Everybody who comes over wants to take pictures of my pictures, and that they go for it. I'm honored. This is the recent episode. Welcome to the family, and can you do a painting of my dog period beginning in 2005? So one of my in-laws is a real dog freak, and so every time she gets a new dog, my sister-in-law, she has to have a new painting. So this was the first one, Maxie, and Maxie passed away. Now they have Rocky, who's this big, horrendous, like white lab that weighs about 8,000 pounds. Now they just got another dog, Opal. So guess what? I just got asked on Easter Sunday to do a painting. Yeah. So next year when I do this, there'll probably be 3 dogs up here. I used to do a lot of cats. I had a really good gig when I was like working my way through undergraduate. In the summers, I was living in Wisconsin still, and I did a lot of house sitting, you know. And what I would do out like in these suburban areas, and they were all pretty affluent areas, you know, everyone had a mailbox out by the curb, by the road. And so I would go around and I would paint on people's mailboxes. Like, do you want a picture of a cardinal or a bluebird or your cat? And everyone would say yes. I'd charge like $50, and I'd go out there with my paints and a bucket of water, and I'd paint a picture on their mailbox. So that was a lot of fun. So I really got into doing like this animal thing, and it's kind of carried me through. Like every couple of years, I'm doing some painting of somebody's something. I don't have any pets anymore. I used to have cats, but I was like that. I don't know why. I was like doing animals. They all had their own personality. Okay, this is the what if vital organs had a life of their own period. So this is where you guys come in. See, now I'm lucky because hearts and kidneys are kind of inherently comical, right? I mean, like, it gives me a lot of material. There's really nothing that funny about the GI tract, you know, except I think the stomach does have potential. Now, here's the game. So we have the stomach, and he's yelling at the intestine. And another thing, I think you're full of crap. What's the diagnosis? You be quiet. No, I knew a medical student would say something. Yeah, well, this isn't step 1, by the way. Any other ideas? What's that?
Constipation.
Well, that's getting funnier. Upset stomach. Huh? Oh, yeah. So when I have to keep current on all this stuff, which, you know, I come off, you know, as being like sarcastic, whatever. I love what I teach and I love what I study, and when I had a research program, I love doing that. But let's be honest, you know, you got to have some levity in the situation. So, you know, I draw these cartoons, and I think, well, what would be a way of getting a point across that somebody's going to remember, that sticks an image in somebody's mind? And usually this stuff comes to me while I'm sitting in the hot tub, usually after alcohol consumption. I get a lot of really good ideas. Or usually where I get my best work is in the summer, and, you know, I'm here year-round, and I'm here to tell you, you'll see if you're around that in July in this place, it's like a graveyard. But I'm here, and I'm sitting there going, like, what the hell am I doing in my office when I should be working the farm? So that's what I call my yard and park. That's actually from last year. That was probably early June, because the tomatoes and everything are pretty small. And I notice I have my UCSC Banana Slugs tank top on. That's where my son's going to college. It's the greatest name for a mascot on earth. Banana Slugs. No, when we went out to visit him last year, these things are real. They're these big yellow slugs that live like on the forest floor, and they look like bananas. I thought it was just some dopey cartoon that they made up. But anyways, I digress. So then you've seen all of these, you know, the whole idea of trying to, you know, bring home points that I think, you know, kind of tie together some concepts, and, you know, and something that you're probably never going to forget. I mean, whether you like me or hate me, you know, this relationship between the heart and the kidney, that was a big thing, you know. And there's all different ways I think you can get that point across. So the very first one I did was the wife and husband when the relationship deteriorates, and then from that I spun off on a lot of these other kind of like heart and kidney things, you know, the dancing heart couple that you've seen a couple of times, all that stuff. Now this is interesting because, you know, it's not all fun and games with this or just, you know, preparing things for lecture, which I obviously take seriously, but over the years I've actually been able to utilize a lot of the stuff that I've done for you in publications. For example, a few years ago, a colleague of mine who's now at the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Nursing, they were doing this study, which you read that about skeletal muscle and elderly, and looking at actually a troponin that's made in skeletal muscle that's a marker of skeletal muscle injury. And we were doing correlations, and he said, look, we need an illustration because there's nothing out there of some muscle fibers being damaged and releasing this skeletal muscle troponin or whatever. So anyways, I drew this thing up, which actually I did use in lecture. You probably don't remember too much of this stuff like a million years ago. We used it in the publication. You know, the reviewers love that stuff. It's like, well, where do you get your graphics from? And I said, well, I drew them. Like, oh, okay, cool. So, you know, you get your name on publication, you get to have some fun. I spend like a day and a half or 2 days in my office drawing, getting paid for it. Someone comes in and says, what are you doing? I'm working on a publication. That's my standard answer now, every time I'm drawing. No, now I say, well, it's coursework, you know, more than, but I still do this. Does anybody know this guy? Anyone recognize the last name?
Dr. Oz.
What's that?
Dr. Oz.
No, that's from over at Rutgers Animal Sciences. Bazumchu, his daughter.
Dr. Oz, that's his
first
first name, and Oz.
No, he's actually associate professor over at Animal Sciences, and his daughter is like fourth year now. Here.
Zeta, right?
Yeah, Zeta. Yeah. She was actually in the first incarnation of this, the very first time I gave this talk. She was here. I got to tell the story like I knew her when she was a little kid story. Because Mehmet and I have known each other for years, and I had a collaboration. I actually had an appointment over at Animal Sciences. So, anyways, I mean these figures, as busy and crazy as they are, they look familiar. Can I remember those? Now, whether you do or not, just go ahead and nod. Because you saw them several times. No, this is the idea of like how granulosa cells and theca cells function. I wasn't sure if that was a Leydig cell, theca cell. We were doing this study for years and years and years about these environmental endocrine disruptors. And we got to the point where we'd written several papers, we decided to write a review, which is always cool. We can write a review. To me, that's like the most fun thing on earth, like putting it all together. And we said, well, God, you know, we need a diagram of a granulosa cell and a theca cell. We want this stupid circle with the triangle for the receptor. So I said, I got just the thing. Well, I took these things. We added in all of these agents that are these endocrine disruptors, environmental endocrine disruptors. The reviewers ate this stuff up. They're like, you know, where did you get your graphics? So, you know, well, I did the graphics, and so since then I've actually done a lot of this for other people who are publishing stuff. You know, like I want a cell, but I don't want that cell. I want something that looks neater. You know, the thing is you have to be careful because once you do this and you release it for publication, then like to reproduce this in another publication, I'd have to actually get permission from this journal to do that. You know, like I can use the original graphics here, all I want because they're mine, but to republish these, you know, you have to tweak them a little bit, so it's all kind of an interesting game. I am a big fan of the Sons of Anarchy. Anyone ever watched it? Nobody? It was about this motorcycle gang in California. It kind of like paralleled the Hell's Angels, very fictional. But it was enjoyable. It was on for several years. And I thought, well, I was sitting on a beach in Cabo a few years ago, and literally I was watching the whales play in the Sea of Cortez. They were jumping around. It was really cool. And I thought, well, what if sea mammals formed a motorcycle club? Keeping in mind kind of the Sons of Anarchy thing. And, oh, by the way, this is me, and this is me. See, I'm drinking Corona, eating lime all at the same time. So what I say is this pays for this. It's the whole method to the madness. So getting back to our sea mammal motorcycle gang, well, instead of Sons of Anarchy, what should we call Sons of Anchovy? So we have this dolphin with his biker cut on, and these are dolphins from the wrong side of the reef. So this is the Sons of Anarchy logo, and they hold like this M16 with like, you know, a side, you know, like the Grim Reaper. Well, so I made it a fishing pole and a fishing line and stuff, you know, but anyways. This painted on the door of my garage down in Brick, actually. And one weekend I was bored. I thought, you know, I just want to paint this thing just to kind of see what it would look like. And so I said to my wife, look, don't come in the garage today. Please, stay out. She's like, what the hell? And like I was out there all day long. I said, okay, you can come out now. She opened the door. She's like, what the fuck are you doing? She said, it's my garage, it's my man cave, so now I have my Yeah, you know, I was just remembering, how could I forget that? The weekend I did that, I woke up the next morning and I had like the worst stomachache on earth. I couldn't figure out what the heck was wrong with me. I hadn't, you know, ate the same food my wife did. I ended up at a kidney stone. And it was, I'm here to tell you, as future physicians, it was the most painful thing I've ever had in my life. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong until like I was doubled down on the floor. And I thought, well, I wonder if maybe because I painted that, like God was striking me down. Fortunately, it took care of itself within a day, and that's why we have good opiates. Oh yes, I can never refuse a request from my little sister here. So she was born in 1964, and that hasn't ended. I was on the phone with her all morning this morning about my mom. That's all she does is bitch about my mom now. So she decides a few years ago to get married in November, but she wants lilacs for her wedding. Keeping in mind now she lives in Wisconsin. I don't care where you live, you're never going to get lilacs in November, right? They're blooming now, and they last for about a week. So I painted her a picture of lilacs, and that was her wedding present. And then finally, oh no, not quite. Now this is the most recent evolution. This is the, if Monet could do this while visually impaired, I can do this given the lousy lighting of my studio period, which began a couple of years ago, actually just over a year ago. So what I did, and it's kind of hard to appreciate here, well this is actually our house of brick. And instead of, again, doing like this architectural rendering, I decided to kind of throw out as many of the rules as I could, and I would like limit myself to 1 or 2 brushes and like 3 colors or 4 colors. Never black. Those of you who have done wine and paint, I said we don't use black, we throw the black away, we make our own dark colors, all right? And just try to keep it loose, and you know, instead of painting this perfectly round sun, just kind of throw some paint on the canvas and see what happens. And I liked it. So I thought, well, I had visited Monet's gardens probably the summer before in France, Giverny, France, and I thought, well, I'll just try and do like an impressionistic thing. I don't know, Monet, but I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And again, done with like 3 colors. And just real loose. The one lesson learned though is that, you know, like I have really a lot of fun doing this, but that you cannot replicate oil with acrylic. You don't get the color, and it's unbelievable. Like this always looks plastic. You know, in oil you get that real rich, deep color, but you know, basically my studio is in my family room in my house, so I'm not going to paint with oil paints in there because the smell is pretty prohibitive. But I have fun playing around with it, so I've been trying to do a little more of that. You have a question?
Yeah, I always thought that had more to do with the texture, how it's very flat with acrylics, but then you can get texture with oils.
Well, you can actually buy acrylic now that has better texture. They make it thick, and so you're supposed to be able to do that, and that's exactly what I did with that. But it's just like the colors aren't that deep. They're not that well rounded. I mean, it looks nice, you know, it's just not as, you can't get that kind of like pow, you know, really bright, you know, striking colors. But yeah, just something else. You know, we always try to play around with stuff. Do things a little bit different, do things a little quicker, a little slower, upside down. I think when I did this, you know, I wear glasses for up close, so I took my glasses off. I figured, well, I'll be like Monet, and I'll do Monet, but little ways to go with that.
You know, I do my makeup like in a dark bathroom for 2
Yeah,
minutes
me
when
too.
it looks like shit, and you did that in the dark studio, and
Yeah, I have the same problem with my hair when I do my hair. Hair, right? All right, then finally, the SGA wine and paint period, which began actually a year ago, just about exactly a year ago. And this was the first one where we were over at Rutgers. This was a tough environment because like we had to go into the men's and ladies' room to get the water. And then at the end of the night, I mean, there were quite a few people there, like everyone left, and Rutgers came in and they wanted us out. And I'm like, but we had like, I don't know, 100 paintbrushes to clean. So me and a couple of the other students went in the men's room in the sink and we're washing all these paintbrushes. So we decided, well, Rutgers isn't going to work. So then we did the one last fall. Yeah, that was at that like nursery down on Highway 1 or wherever it was. And then most recently, we just did the one a couple of months ago, maybe a month ago. This was actually probably the best location, but hopefully we'll do more of these. I know the SGA said they wanted to do 2 a year, and I said I'm more than willing to do 2 a year or more. It's up to you guys, but lots of fun. Yeah, that's enough. What questions do you have? What else do you want to know? It's plenty early. This is your time. I should have come in like sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and then you say, oh, well, it's not really Dr. Zachow, it's just some guy talking about his art. It's still me. It's just, yeah.
How do you find the time to like kind of just set aside everything else and go? Is this like a once a month, like, or is this like a once a week kind of thing?
No, that's hard, you know.
Yeah.
And to set aside the time, I don't want to say that I procrastinate, but like right now I've got some ideas of some things I want to do. I mentioned the dog, which I got to get done, and there's a couple other ideas that struck me. And it's like once I get started, I said, I don't know if you're ready to eat pizza. Once I get started, it's fine, but I have to make sure, like, you know, is this something I'm going to be able to finish? Because I don't like to start a painting and have it go on for weeks. Like I want to get it done in a couple of days or whatever, and then move on. In the winter, there's always a problem because by the time I get home, it's dark. And I just don't like painting with just moonlight. It's hard. This time of the year, I get home, I don't want to be inside. I want to be out working in the yard, you know. So I just have to make the time. Fortunately, right now, like the work schedule for me, I'm at the point in my career where that's not as demanding as it used to be. It's pretty normal, you know, weekends anymore like I used to. But there's always something that keeps me from, like, I wish I could take a week and just paint, you know, but it's not going to happen. I got 2 houses, a job, you know, 2 of everything because you have 2 houses, you know, double the bills, everything. Plus all the outside teaching I've been doing lately too has been keeping me really busy. Yeah.
Have you tried any other mediums like pottery or sculpting or anything like that?
I have. The most recent, I should have taken pictures of the wooden sea creature collection. No, I got this idea. We're looking through some catalog, you know, things you get in the mail, like from whatever, you know, Pottery Barn or whatever, and there was like this whale, and it was kind of like this Americana beaten up wood thing, you know, distressed. And my wife said, wow, I'd really like to hang that. We have a sunroom in brick, and there's this big wall. She said, well, I said, don't buy it. I'll make it for you. So me and my son made this whale. It's like, oh, it's really cool, actually. And we just stressed it and painted it to make it look like it was 100 years old. And so then, of course, you know what happened. She liked that one. So now we have a whale, a shark, a dolphin, a swordfish, a sailfish, a seahorse, a sailboat. I did in the same thing, and like 3 starfish. So these things are hanging. So that's actually been fun. I've been doing that over the last year, and I think I'm kind of done with that now. You know, because you run out of wall space. You know, the house of brick is like, you know, 950 square feet. It's not that big, so you can imagine there's stuff everywhere. Looks like a Bed Bath and Beyond when you walk in there. And I haven't really worked in clay. I've done a lot of other, like in the past, pastel and that type of thing. I don't do any of that anymore. It's pretty much strictly acrylic and watercolor at this point. Mostly the former, not the latter. I like working in wood, but I always say, like, when it comes to building something, I'm like Homer Simpson, you know, like, I can design stuff, you know, draw pictures, and this is what I want. And when I go to try and make a 90-degree angle, you know, it's close enough, you know, no one will notice. You know, so I try to stay away from carpentry. What else? Yeah.
So like, what advice would you give?
That is really obnoxious, isn't it?
What advice would you give if like we want to like pursue art? Like, what would you think is the most important thing? Like, just like to keep practicing, or like make time, or just like make sure like stays. It's like maintains like an important part.
Well, yeah, and I mean, hey, look, I don't need to tell you right now that's going to be horrendously difficult, but, you know, I was always a firm believer. Look, I was a student just like you. I did 2 fellowships, I had 3 degrees, you know, I went through the whole thing. You can always find time. It's just maybe not as much as you want, you know. I went for a period of time when I was going through grad school and through the postdocs where I didn't paint for years, you know, because I just didn't have time. I didn't have space. I was living in a little efficiency apartment in LA, you know, where was I going to paint? But, you know, as long as you can try and do something, you know, and then you'll have time later on where hopefully you can get back into it, you know, to a more aggressive level. But that's always the problem. Then when you're early in your career too, you're gonna have less time than you have now. You know, you can believe that. So you can always find some time. Do little things. That's what I ended up starting. Like right now, if I really get the bug and I really want to paint something, I can't do the 11 by 14 or 16 by 20 painting that I have in mind. I always keep around little canvases just so I can do something, like a tomato or something, you know what I mean? I mean, seriously, or a seashell or something. And then I'll paint that, and it's like, okay, that goes in the bathroom, you know? Always hard.